We like to think that children's shows hosts are wholesome pillars of virtue who never end up in compromising or controversial situations. Yet, for years, screen grabs of Mr. Rogers posing with either one or two middle fingers extended have circulated online, featuring captions that indicate that the famed children's show host was caught giving the bird disdainfully during the filming of the final episode of his award-winning show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. In this video, we'll take a look at these viral screenshots and provide you with their backstory, and we'll also take some time to reflect on Fred Rogers' remarkable life story and inspiring rise to fame. Flipping the bird? Although the pictures of Mr. Rogers seemingly giving the audience a rather obscene hand gesture at first glance seem alarming, within context they merely capture an innocuous moment from a 1967 episode. In the episode in question, Rogers led some youngins through a familiar children's song called Where is Thumpkin? The song is traditionally accompanied by all those who are participating holding up the corresponding digits that are named in the song. The resulting clip has become notorious online due to the portion of the song in which Rogers gives a shout-out to the Tall Man. As the name implies, Tall Man is the light-hearted nickname for the middle finger. When Rogers got to this part of the song, not only did he extend both of his middle fingers towards the camera and audience, but he can also clearly be seen cracking a big jovial smile while doing so, seemingly oblivious to the off-color meaning of the hand gesture. So while the resulting screen grabs inevitably turned into internet meme gold, it's unlikely Rogers was trying to intentionally be edgy by flipping the world the bird. A lonely childhood. Fred McFeely Rogers was born March 20th, 1928, in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. His dad, James Hillis Rogers, was a successful businessman and president of the McFeely Brick Company, one of Latrobe's most prominent businesses. Fred's mother, Nancy, enjoyed knitting sweaters for soldiers from Western PA who fought in Europe. She also volunteered at Latrobe Hospital. Fred grew up in a 3-story brick house with his sister Elaine, whom his family adopted when he was 11. During his childhood, Rogers spent the majority of his time in solitude. He loved playing with puppets and was partial to the company of his grandfather. Fred always had a deep love for music and began to learn the piano at age 5. Although musically gifted and blessed with a vibrant imagination, Rogers had a challenging childhood. He was a timid and introverted boy who was also overweight. He was frequently homebound due to his struggles with asthma. At school, he was bullied because of his weight. His classmates gave him the demeaning nickname Fat Freddy, and his self-esteem naturally took a hit. Rogers found himself quite lonely as a child and had very few friends. His best friend ultimately was himself, and instead of socializing with other children his age, he turned to his ventriloquist dummy and stuffed animals for support. One might look at Fred's imaginary friends in a negative light, but when you zoom out and consider how he was able to turn his fictional creations into the iconic world we all know and love, it becomes clear he turned struggle and hardship into one of his biggest strengths. Fred Rogers taught us, among many things, that it was okay to let your mind take you to far-off, fantastic worlds where anything was possible, and love and friendship were the key to a meaningful life. This theme of turning adversity into strength was one that his life story frequently pivoted back to. While Rogers ultimately did great things with the difficult hand he was dealt, in his younger years, his loneliness and constant bullying would leave him traumatized. During the speech he delivered at his graduation from St. Vincent College, he was quoted as saying that as a child, he often cried to himself whenever he was alone. He also said the negative experiences from his childhood made him seek out the stories of others who were poor in spirit. I felt for them, he reflected, and throughout his life he continued to feel deep love and sympathy for those dealing with troubling situations and maladies. Before we tell you more, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. Breaking out of his shell. While Fred Rogers' schoolmates were often cruel, he always had people in his life who refused to see him as a lost cause. One such person was his grandfather. There was one time that Fred wanted to climb a stone wall, but his mother and grandmother wouldn't let him do it, fearing he might injure himself. Seeing the value of learning to do things for himself, Fred's grandfather stepped in and encouraged him to climb the wall anyway. Fred climbed like it was nobody's business and gained a great deal of confidence. Another person who helped Fred immensely was his high school buddy Jim Stumbaugh. Jim was a popular student while Fred was not. But after Rogers came to Stumbaugh's side in the hospital after he sustained an injury during a football game, Jim took Fred under his wing and helped him to have a much better high school experience. Just like Stumbaugh and his grandfather looked out for him, Fred spent the remainder of his life seeking opportunities to advocate for others. Everything he did was coupled with intention. Kindness became a way of life for him. His own battles became a tuning fork of sorts that offered insights into what others were experiencing. Without Fat Freddy, there would be no Fred Rogers. After college, Fred wanted to immediately enter seminary, but he chose to go into television instead after his parents got a TV at their home in 1951. At first, Fred was actually quite opposed to television. He told CNN once that he wanted to go into television because he hated it. He hoped, however, he could find a way of using it as an instrument to nurture those who would watch. And that's what he did. His first TV gig was working at NBC as a floor director for several network shows, including Your Hit Parade and Gabby Hayes' children's program. In 1953, he helped develop the WQED public access children's show, The Children's Corner. It was with that show he began to tap into his childhood love for puppetry to develop whimsical characters that could teach young viewers invaluable life lessons. Given the freedom to explore the subject material he wanted to, Rogers used the characters he commanded to deliver affirming and virtuous messages that were meant to lift the viewer up and prove to themselves they had value and merit. Critics and audiences alike were sold on Rogers' soul-nourishing message. After attending Pittsburgh Theological Seminary and being ordained as a Presbyterian minister in 1963, Fred was approached by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation to develop and host a 15-minute children's program called Mr. Rogers. This was the first time Rogers appeared on camera. The show aired from 1963 to 67. Rogers continued to tap into his personal childhood experiences coupled with his religious philosophy to hone his screen presence. In the process, he became an iconic TV personality in Canada while also creating a long-running children's show called Mr. Dress-Up. Rogers' experiences with the CBC helped him shape and develop the concept that would eventually become Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which premiered on PBS in 1968. The show ran for 895 episodes before ending in 2001. 2 years after the final episode aired, Fred Rogers died of stomach cancer on February 27, 2003. Fred's death was tragic, but it's undeniable he touched countless lives throughout his life and professional career. While he was a man of faith who was deeply committed to his belief in God, Fred had a way of reaching across the aisle and delivering a universal message of love, friendship, and goodness that transcended all ideological barriers. He never came across as preachy, nor did it seem like he had any sort of underlying agenda other than to build people up and teach us the value of being a good neighbor. Now it's time to hear from you. What's your favorite memory of Mr. Rogers? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.